Welcome to another episode of Bridging of Ages. My name is Dan Mendelevitz. Today we're going to talk about lost institutional knowledge. Lost institutional knowledge when experience leaves. Looking at some of the things we're going to cover today is we need to understand what that institutional knowledge is and how important it is to the organization and your company. We want to look at some of the things that are going to make sure that you understand the consequence, the reasons, and why it happens. So, why don't we define it first? So, what is the definition of institutional knowledge? It's really your collective experience and insights that your employees, that your organization gain over time. So it's that collective knowledge. I like to call it the folklore of your company. If you think about anywhere you've been working or any organization you're part of, it's important to understand what that institution and what its knowledge base is and how you can utilize it and tap into it. So what is its role? It's the role in is really in the operation in your continuity. It really helps you with the smooth operation. It preserves your essential processes and your organizational understanding is really what's important there. So this institutional knowledge really creates a very important operational continuity. It allows you to do the work day to day without thinking about it. If you think about how habits are formed or how things are done on day to day and how people get their work done, that folklore, that institutional knowledge helps your people make all those things happen. And if you can tap into that, it creates a competitive advantage for you. So, this is very important for your organization. You really need to have some strong institutional knowledge, experience. You can have better efficiencies, you can bring people on quicker, and really understand why you're doing this. So, think about those parts of every day in your organization and company. There's different kinds of knowledge that you carry. There's explicit and there's tacit knowledge. So, what's the difference? Explicit versus tacit knowledge. So, explicit knowledge are things that you kind of think about. You usually document them. There are procedures, there are manuals, there are databases. They're really easy to share. They're really easy to store. You can recall them. Every organization has a set of policies at different levels. It may be for your HR, it may be for your technology, it may be how you interact with people outside your organization, it may be how people communicate internally. And these are all explicit characteristics that people utilize to get their work done day to day. So think about all your manuals and procedures. Now, I will ask you a question. Do people actually read those in your organization? Some do, some don't. I would imagine your HR functions probably know their book pretty well. Other people in the organization may not know it as well as they do. And is there a way to convey that? Now let's take a look at the other side of that, the tacit knowledge. So, what's the nature of tacit knowledge? It's really the insights, the experiences, the skills. It almost exists at a subconscious level, and it's really hard to formalize. So I've gone into organizations and they say we want to automate a lot of our processes. But what I usually find is they don't necessarily understand how people get their work done every day. And I'd say in some organizations that I've seen, it could be up to 90% of that organizational knowledge is really just that tacit thing. Think about how you do your work day to day. There's little shortcuts that all of us take that we internalize that people outside don't necessarily know about. And even somebody who walks in new into an organization might not understand that. That's something you have to learn. That's why I call it the folklore of the company or your organization. And those little shortcuts help you get the work done day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year. So, how do you transfer that knowledge to somebody else who's coming in new? Or if you have somebody leaving, how can you extract that from them? So, one of the things that I like to do is when I am consulting in a company, I like to look for that tacit knowledge because that's really how things get done. And if I'm going to help them improve their processes, I need to understand that even more so than the stuff they have written down. So interesting. I was part of a consulting organization, and we were working for a division of a very large company. And there was the admin for that organization. She did a lot of different work. Day to day, got things done, was quiet. One of those people who you don't hear any noise from because they're so good at what they do. Well, the word came down from higher up that they had to make some cuts. So, what they did is they didn't look at the tacit side, they looked at the explicit side. And this person's work didn't look necessary and looked like an easy place to cut. Well, what happened? She was removed from the organization. All of a sudden, everything stopped working. Orders weren't done, down to you couldn't find a pen or paper for the printer. People who had trips planned couldn't get that stuff done. It turned out that she was the linchpin for the organization, but she was so efficient that nobody knew. And nobody had been passed on this tacit knowledge that she had created. It was a disaster. I mean, this place was up in arms because we couldn't get our work done. Nothing worked. And it all came down to this one person, to the point where they asked her to come back. Well, by then she had moved on to something else. And it took a while to fix things and people to figure stuff out. And as you can imagine, some of the higher ups were yelling and asking why nothing was getting done. And nobody took responsibility for removing this person. So if you think about it, experienced workers really hold this valuable tacit knowledge. And you gain it through experience because, as we've talked about before, there is no substitute for experience. And that's really essential to your organization. So when you push out older workers or experienced workers, you really lose that critical expertise, the relationships, the performance, all those things that are interconnected, that tacit knowledge that you're not thinking about because You're reading what's explicit, not what's tacit. So, what do we do with some of the strategies to get this knowledge captured? How are you going to capture that knowledge from people? I was doing work for a large corporation, and we had a set time that I was going to work there. It happened to be a very long project. It went for 2.5 years, but at the end, there had to be a turnover. Very successful. We brought it in under budget. We brought it in on time. It was really a good group of people to work with, but somebody was designated to have the handoff. So what I did is I developed a system where I could transfer the knowledge. And what's really important is I asked and received, I said, I need this person's time to be carved out so that we can talk about all the things around what you see on the paper, that tacit knowledge. And what was wonderful is I was able to transfer as much as possible. Now, obviously, he has to come up to speed, but we overlapped and he had the knowledge and the folklore of what he needed in order to take over this project going forward. So think about that when you're moving people out or bringing consultants in and out, how you transfer your tacit knowledge. So let's look at the consequences of knowledge loss. What happens when it's lost? The quality goes down. The consistency goes down. You get lost productivity, especially if you just chop it off. You just remove somebody because it looked like a good idea to cut a bunch of people. When you push out your experienced people, what is going with them? Because remember, what we're hiring people for is what's in their head. They're carrying that and the connections and the interdependencies and all those things that we do day to day in order to get our work done. So we need to find strategies to get that institutional knowledge, keep it consistent, transfer it, and find ways not to have it lost. Because when you have the impact of that knowledge loss can really affect your organization. You may find your quality or control just drop off 15, 20, 25%. You'll have new people coming in that don't have that institutional knowledge, that don't have that folklore, that don't understand. There's nobody there to guide them. They have to figure out things all over again. Or I've seen in some organizations where they just bring in series of consultants and consultants and consultants, and consultants are good for the hit for a specific thing, but they don't carry the institutional knowledge because they walk out the door with it. Obviously, anything confidential and everything else you keep internal. But remember, the actual work is done, walked out the door. It's in their brain, it's in their head. So if you think about that, how do you not push those people out? And how will you get new people in order to find out the folklore of your organization? And as we've talked about many times in other shows, that's where intergenerational teams show their power. You have the experienced workers who have the folklore, who can mentor. You have the newer people who are coming up with creative and new ideas, who can reverse mentor. And you get that interaction that will help you not have these consequences of that knowledge not loss. because you don't want to have that big dip of operational efficiency and productivity, and when it declines, you're going to feel it, and you're going to introduce a lot of inefficiencies. So how does that impact your innovation and problem solving? We've already talked a little bit about that. Do you value experience and knowledge? Some organizations do, some don't. Some just give it lip service. Intergenerational teams help you preserve that. Experienced workers really have a historical context of how your organization and company works. They know how to get things done. When you integrate that with newer workers who can look and say and help you with efficiencies and say, why don't we try it a different way? You can meld those two things together. So think about it. You're going to be impacted by this knowledge loss. You're going to lose experience. You're going to create slower resolutions of problems within your organization. And your innovation is going to go down. You could look at the metrics. Your innovation and productivity are going to drop. So all highly important. So let's take a look. We've talked about these explicit and tacit knowledges, the importance of that institutional knowledge, and we were looking at the consequences of what happens when you don't take that into account when you're either making cuts, changes, reorganizations, or wanting to bring new people on. So how does this all relate to the things that we talk about on this podcast of ageism, of intergenerational teams? Do you want to lose your knowledge, your institutional knowledge? Do you have a good understanding of what the tacit parts of it as opposed to the explicit? When you're making those decisions for your organization, you need to look at what will make it more successful. These are some of the things that I want you to think about when you're thinking about institutional knowledge. So we're going to go off. We're going to have a word from our sponsor. When we come back, we can look at some action items and tips that you can do in order to look at lost institutional knowledge and how you can work to make sure you are successful. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, welcome to Bridging of Ages. My name is Dan Mendelevitz. We've been talking about lost institutional knowledge. Let's take a look at some action items that you can do in order to help your organization and company counter the lost institutional knowledge. Action item 1. Reduce knowledge attrition. You need to set up ways to transfer that knowledge so that you can reduce that knowledge loss and really have continuity within your organization. We've talked in past shows about setting up mentoring, of looking at ways to create better communication between people who are more experienced and people who are newer to the organization. You really need to formalize and really help retain that critical knowledge, because you don't want people leaving or walking out the door and taking all that folklore and information with them, so that you could lose half the knowledge if that happens. And as we talked about in the story, we had one person who was a linchpin, but it wasn't understood at the managerial level and the executive level. And when that person was gone, there was chaos. You don't want that to happen. You want the continuity. And this all ties into what we talked about with our intergenerational teams. Action item 2. Understanding tacit versus explicit knowledge. So, as we found, and I like to call, the explicit knowledge is really the folklore of your organization. It's how things really get done as opposed to how you think they get done. And knowing how people really do their work will really help you transfer that knowledge. And as we found in some organization, it can be 89% of the knowledge is really all that, that tacit knowledge. The explicit is all written down. And even if it's there, let's face it, most people don't read your manuals. They're nice to put together, and I know it's important, and you need to have policies that are enforced. However, that is not the day-to-day knowledge that people do their work. It's really the tacit knowledge that helps them make that happen. Let's look at action item 3. Create knowledge retention strategies. So how are you going to do knowledge transfer? Some of it you can document. Some of it can be done through technology solutions, and even some of the AI stuff that's out there now can help you with that, as long as you review it carefully. How are you going to not lose that critical institutional knowledge that you need to move forward? Like I said, when I was talking about the knowledge transfer that I did, I sat down, I put a plan together with our mutual manager, and we had a way to transfer that knowledge. I asked and received from them the ability to carve out time from the person, because we all get busy and we have multiple things we have to do, and we sometimes just keep layering and piling stuff onto people. But when it became explicit that part of this person's job was to learn what I had to give him, it worked much better because we had set times. We set a schedule together. We actually put together a project plan just for the transfer. I gave him all my materials, but I didn't just give him my materials. I gave him some of my notes, but I didn't just give him my notes. We walked through them. We explained them. I had him ask questions. I encouraged him to ask questions. I was there as a resource, and we were able to transfer that knowledge, because there were all sorts of things I did day to day to make it all work. Just to give you an idea, here was one of the pieces that was in there. There was a critical vice president that we needed in order to move a particular group to where they needed to be. However, this person was never available because they just did wall-to-wall meetings all day. One of the things I found is I talked with their assistant. Their admin called me directly saying, she's in meetings all day. I really am the person that connects the dots. So here was a place where on paper, in the explicit, it said we need to work with this vice president directly in order to get it done. She wasn't available. And the nature of the project, she didn't have the incentive to have to give us time necessarily. But the tacit knowledge was if we went to her assistant, who would point us to the people that we need to talk to in that group, we were able to actually get the work done. Now, I was able to transfer this knowledge to the person who took over the project from me as my consulting gig was ending. There's an example of tacit knowledge. So if you look at the actions that you want to take, action item 1, reduce that knowledge attrition. So set up, formalize programs, get your experienced workers working with less experienced workers, help them understand that there's an interplay and there's a back and forth, that both sides have knowledge that's very important, and that you can move that back to forth. Obviously, that comes back to intergenerational teams where you have that different level of experience and knowledge and different things that people see at different ages, and you get to meld that and put it together. Action item 2, understand tacit versus explicit knowledge. Explicit knowledge, it's out there for you. You're used to that. It's written down. The tacit is the folklore, and you need to know how people really get their work done, not how you think they get their work done. And creative knowledge retention strategies. How will you transfer this knowledge? How will you retain it? How will you get the new people to understand it? So, looking at all those action items, here's our tip of the day. Understand the consequences of what you're losing. I think we often don't think about what's going to be lost when somebody leaves, whether they do it voluntarily or if they're rift or you have an reorganization that moves them to a different part of the organization that you're building. What have you lost? So if you understand the consequences of what you are losing, it will help you create those actions that can help you no longer lose that institutional knowledge. This has been another show of Bridging of Ages. My name is Dan Mendelevitz. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Invest in brain power, fuel brilliance.